All right, it is 6 o'clock. So thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for watching my lives. As you may already know, Devil's Advocates is a channel where we follow a couple of cases. We follow true crime cases in particular with a critical eye on law enforcement and media and the judicial system. Part of the reason why we call ourselves Devil's Advocates is we ask the question, what if the story that mainstream media and law enforcement is telling us is not how it really happened? So we will play Devil's Advocates with the official story, the official narrative. So that's my shtick. That's my way of coming at it. I have been a longtime critic and critical thinker, critic of the judicial system, the law enforcement, because it's all too often, in my opinion, that law enforcement makes an early prediction of who the bad guy is, and then they fit the evidence to make it so that the guy goes down that they have fingered. And oftentimes, in that pursuit of justice, they make mistakes. They fabricate evidence. They plant evidence, whatever the case may be, to get the conviction, because they've decided long before the trial who is guilty. And then it comes down to the court of public opinion, where the public has been told how to think about a thing before they've even had their first day in court. And so I tend to try to believe that a person is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. I therefore take the presumption of innocence that people basically, this is going to talk about Lulu's case. So let me cover the two big stories that we cover. We are currently covering primarily Luigi Mangione, and yes, I say his name. I don't call him Lulu. I call him Luigi Mangione, and I talk about the alleged shooting of Brian Thompson in the United Healthcare situation. That is the primary story that we probably follow. Second to that is Brian Kohberger and the Idaho 4 murders, which is very close and dear to me because it's near to where I live. I went to school in Pullman. I traveled to Moscow where the murders happened on a regular basis when I was going to school there. So that story is not only of national interest, but of personal interest because of how close into my backyard that story is. In both cases, I have questions that I'm going to talk about tonight in detail about whether or not these individuals who have been accused of the crimes did the crimes, or whether, if they did they act alone? Were there others involved? Is law enforcement hiding part of what happened to pin the blame on the lone gunman, lone knifeman, whatever you want to call it? Because that's just easier to present in a court of law. I realize that a lot of you probably are following my channel primarily because of Luigi Mangione, and so we will focus most of this evening on Luigi Mangione. I'm going to tell you in my notes what we're going to be covering so that you can decide for yourself whether this is a good investment of your time. But I want to start out with Brian Kohberger a little bit. Even though it's the lesser story, we won't spend a whole lot of time on Brian Kohberger. So again, if you're here for Luigi, please just give me a moment to get through some of the highlights of the things that are on my mind, and then we'll get into some deep dive analysis of what I did today and what I want to talk about. And somebody watched How to Blow Up a Pipeline, and my mind was like awoken. Fantastic movie. Thank you so much for watching that. I have asked people many, many times to consider watching How to Blow Up a Pipeline and consider this in relation to Luigi Mangione. Did a group of individuals pull off this event and then let one person take the fall so that the rest of the conspirators can get away? I have posited this question on my account many times, many videos. I talk about the player one's theory, the Luigi shuffle, about how there might have been a group of conspirators that are all dressed the same to basically lead law enforcement off on rabbit holes and false leads and stuff like that, so that the actual shooter could get away from Central Park while they followed the wrong person out of the park. In fact, as an aside, we know that now that law enforcement had followed and tracked an individual who was a dead ringer for the suspect in the United Healthcare shooting for 3 days, and then had to let them go because they had an airtight alibi and wasn't the guy. So there is the idea that there might be multiple people involved who purposely misled law enforcement so that they would follow the wrong guy and the shooter would get away. This is just a theory. I can't prove these things, but these are the things that we talk about on the Devil's Advocates, is the idea of what if the narrative that they're telling us is not what really happened. Let's talk briefly about what today brought for me. Big day for me. First of all, The court system on the Bryan Kohberger case released a 175-page transcript of the recent hearing into the Bryan Kohberger case. There were some, I have not had time yet to read or anything, the 175-page redacted transcript that came out. However, news agencies like CNN have weighed in on what came out of those transcripts, and there's some big moments that we just want to talk about briefly. And there was also some big headlines in the Bryan Kohberger thing that I thought were briefly worth mentioning right now. So if you're not familiar, I will try to be brief about my description of Bryan Kohberger. Bryan Kohberger is a college student who is a PhD candidate in criminology at Pullman at Washington State University, allegedly accused in 2022. Has it been that long? Yeah. Of murdering 4 college students in their apartment / off-campus house. There were 6 individuals living there. 4 were murdered on 2 different floors by one individual in what was alleged to be 15 minutes of time period. The lead suspect is Bryan Kohberger, who apparently got away without leaving more than one tiny speck of touch DNA on a knife sheath at the crime scene, and no blood in his car, no blood in his clothes, no material evidence whatsoever of the victims that made it into any possession of his. They've got him basically nailed down because they think his car was in the area and his cell phone was off during the time of the murders, and other things that were circumstantial, plus the 1 speck of DNA. This is why it's important about the 175-page document that came out today, because the only thing that truly places Bryan Kohberger in the house with the 4 individuals who apparently he knew nothing about. There's some speculation that he knew one of the victims. Most people say that he knew none of the victims. I said it was going to be brief. I'm not doing terribly well at being brief. I apologize. But the touch DNA is a big subject of the whole thing. Before we get into what the 175-page redacted document told us, according to CNN, now I'm basing this on a CNN's analysis of that 175-page document because, again, I did not read it myself. But before we get into that, I want to say one of the things that happened was the defense in Bryan Kohberger's case is asking to strike the death penalty off the table due to the fact that maybe Bryan Kohberger has autism spectrum disorder. So what does that mean? Does that mean that the defense has already said, yeah, he did it, but you can't execute him because he's got a mental handicap? So it is considered a form of, I hate this word, mental retardation to have autism spectrum disorder. Our court systems in America have traditionally stated that it is cruel and unusual punishment to put someone to death who has a mental disability. So the defense in Bryan Kohberger's, why can't I say Kohberger tonight? The defense in Bryan Kohberger's case is already saying that, hey, regardless of how this trial comes out, we need to take the death penalty off the case because he may have autism spectrum disorder and therefore is ineligible for the death sentence because it would be considered cruel and unusual punishment for executing somebody with a mental handicap or a mental deficiency. I will tell you this, that I know some things also about being on the spectrum. Not that I'm on the spectrum, but I have known people who are on the spectrum. Things like Asperger's, for example, make people present in such a way where they look flat, they don't act like you and I, they don't seem to have a lot of emotion. That doesn't make you a killer. I have a friend that I made acquaintance with who has Asperger's, and I would tell a joke, and literally he was unable to perceive jokes. And so he would be like, are you being serious right now or not? And I'm like, no, of course I'm not being serious. But he couldn't make that connection because there was something wrong in his head where literally he has an inability to read people and understand when they're joking. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because people will point out how Bryan Kohberger acted as proof or evidence of he must be a killer. Because he looks cold, he looks flat, he's maybe misogynistic and doesn't like women, whatever the case may be. If he's on the spectrum, so to speak, and he has a mental deficiency, that kind of stuff does not mean you're a killer just because you act awkward. So this is where that's all going. What else was there? So the CNN thing that I thought was super interesting was, and I think I've got some quotes. This is a big review about the CNN kind of, I don't even know who she was. It was CNN's TikTok account where I saw this. And I'm going to go ahead and do character analysis, forbidden comment. So it turns out I believe the murders were on, now I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, December 13th, on December. So there was a time after the murders. They had no idea who did it. And in comes the FBI on December 19th. This is what a summary of what CNN said on a TikTok video I saw today from CNN's official TikTok account. On December 19th, the FBI told the Idaho police to look into Bryan Kohberger. So at that time, the Idaho did not have Bryan Kohberger on their radar. It was the FBI that came to them and said, you need to find a link to Bryan Kohberger. Basically, this is my summation. You need to find a link to Bryan Kohberger. They gave Idaho the name of Bryan Kohberger. At that time, DNA, or maybe it was earlier, DNA from the knife sheath was driven by an Idaho officer, law enforcement officer, to Houston, Texas to be genetically investigated. They came back after the investigation with a low match to two males of unknown origin who were cousins that were related to a second generation grandparent, and then down to modern day, they said, to four brothers who are not named. The four brothers, none of them are a Kohberger. The FBI was still insisting that they need to make that link to Bryan Kohberger. So authorities at the lab asked the FBI to try to get one of these four brothers who are not Kohbergers, they are not the last name Kohberger, get one of these four brothers to submit their DNA to a publicly accessible DNA database search genealogy type place. They approached one of the brothers. The brothers basically told them to pack sand, and they won't do that. But the FBI continued to put pressure on them and continued to work the case until eventually they were able to make a connection to Bryan Kohberger. All of that just basically is to say it looks a little sketchy when the FBI comes to Idaho and says, your man is Bryan Kohberger, find a way to connect these two people, and then work the DNA stuff. Well, you need to work with us because we're not finding a link to Bryan Kohberger. Okay, well, work harder. Find somebody that'll submit their DNA to a lab that we can use to link to Bryan Kohberger. And eventually they got there. One of the attorneys on Bryan Kohberger's case has been recently retained, who's an expert in DNA. So while the defense had asked for some DNA evidence to be suppressed and those genealogy records to be suppressed, claiming that it was not done properly, the judge ultimately ruled that it was done properly and they're going to proceed with that information. So now the defense has retained an expert in DNA. Go ahead.
So Natasha's wanting to know if there's any doctors confirming that he has autism.
According to what I read today, they have not had a doctor confirm or any kind of doctor's confirmation that Bryan Kohberger has autism spectrum disorder. That was said specifically that there has not been yet presented proof that he has this condition. But the defense is suggesting that he does have this condition and that if it's true, that they should take the death penalty off the table. So that's the bottom line in the Bryan Kohberger. The rest of this evening is going to be about Luigi Mangione. So let's get into the Luigi Mangione. What did I do today? Well, what I did today is I got a copy of that official Omnibus for motion of pretrial hearing. It was called the Omnibus Pretrial Motion for Relief. It was a request by Luigi Mangione's attorney, Thomas Dickey, to suppress information and to basically request a writ of habeas corpus to have Luigi Mangione basically released from custody, if you will, of the Pennsylvania. Now, he's in custody federally, actually, right now, not of Pennsylvania. But basically, it was you illegally arrested this guy. He should not be detained in any way, shape, or form in the state of Pennsylvania. And here's the reason why. And I read this document. I've got it in front of me. I've got notes all over it. I've got highlights all over it. And here's the difference. When I first heard about this, I did a quick off-the-cuff take on a live. And then I did a deeper dive of it on a live. All of that's recorded and placed on YouTube. Now what I have done is I've gone through and read it word for word. And I've highlighted a section, and I've got new questions, and I got new comments. And I have a really, really big one that's super interesting for people here tonight, in my opinion. Let me clarify something up front. I am not a lawyer. I am not an attorney. I'm not an expert of legal fact. However, I want to say to all you people who act like, if I'm not a lawyer, you should shut the hell up because you're not qualified to talk, that this is ridiculous. Saying that people can't educate themselves on a system unless they have a degree is ridiculous. So let's please try to put away this attitude that if I'm not a lawyer, I have no right to talk about issues of law. I am a citizen just like you, and we should, as citizens, understand the law. So let's talk together about that law. And if we don't understand the law, how about we get educated about the law? And if lawyers have to come on and educate us about the law, then that's great. But don't say that we don't have the right to talk about it and try to understand the laws that are being used against us as citizens to put us in jail. All right? So there's my soapbox for tonight. I have a right to give my opinions of how I understand the law. And if I'm wrong, I'll eat crow. I'll say, man, I was wrong. Sorry, I'm a citizen. I'm trying to figure out the law. We've got a very complex system in America. But I will tell you this. What I found tonight and what I think answers a question that people have had is amazing. There's a question people say, Luigi Mangione was arrested because he presented false identity to the cops and that was illegal. Not true. I figured out from reading this document tonight what the argument is and why they say it's not true that Luigi Mangione committed a crime by presenting false identification to Altoona, Pennsylvania. They're claiming that wasn't a crime. Everyone that I see on my comments tells me it absolutely is a crime, and that's why he was arrested. Arrested for presenting false identification to a police officer. I'm going to tell you in my layman's terms why I found out that's not true. It's a legal gray area, but Thomas Dickey did a good enough job that even a simple guy on an armchair can figure out what he's saying and why it was a problem. All right? So let's dive into a few things now. First, I want to point something out about Luigi Mangione. We were all told that when Luigi Mangione was arrested, he was found with a letter to the feds confessing to the crimes and even praising the feds as being the good guys, essentially, and that he really respects them. Also in his belongings was a confession stating that he acted alone and that it was easy to basically prove that he acted alone. Also in his possessions, they claimed, was what was called a manifesto, some kind of basically philosophical discussion about why he was doing these things. These were all alleged to be presented by at Luigi's arrest, okay? And so one could argue, and have argued, trust me, that Luigi Mangione intended to be caught, that he sat in Altoona, Pennsylvania at the McDonald's waiting for officers to come get him, that he had the weapon on him, he had the bullets on him, he had a manifesto on him, and a letter of confession saying, yes, I did it. Why, therefore, people keep asking me, did Luigi Mangione declare himself not guilty? Because he's already said he's guilty. And people will argue, well, that's because that's a lawyer's job. When he gets legal representation, he could say, yeah, I'm guilty, I did it. And his lawyer's gonna be like, holy shit, dude, never say that. From now on, not guilty, and you make them prove it. But fundamentally, I wanna make sure you understand this. No attorney is ethically allowed in this country to speak on behalf of their client things that are not the wishes of their client. This is important. I want you to understand. If Luigi Mangione is saying that he did it and that he's guilty and that he's confessed to it and he has no problem with that, his attorney cannot therefore go and say, my client would like to say that you falsely arrested him, that it was bullshit, that you planted evidence on him, that it was an illegal arrest and you should toss it out. His attorney can't just say that because he feels like it. The attorney feels like it. Luigi Mangione has to agree that that is how he wants to be represented. Why is this important? Because a lot of you are stressing the idea that Luigi Mangione already confessed to this and that this is just a legal responsibility of his attorney to declare not guilty and to fight the case. However, the statements that you're going to hear tonight that I'm going to say were basically on behalf of Luigi Mangione, were in the document that Thomas Dickey filed. The defendant is requesting. The defendant is requesting. That means Luigi Mangione is requesting these things. His attorney cannot request things for Luigi Mangione that Luigi Mangione does not want to have happen. That is unethical. We don't allow that. So I assure you, if his attorney says Luigi Mangione is requesting you toss out the evidence, that you violated my civil liberties, that's not just his lawyer talking. That is his lawyer talking on behalf of a client who has agreed that that's what he wants to be represented as. So put out of your mind right now that Luigi Mangione is confessing to the crimes and not intending to fight it, and that somehow his attorneys are fighting it for him against his wishes. Luigi Mangione is intending to fight this and has stated that he has been illegally detained and arrested in Altoona, Pennsylvania. As I've stated before, let's talk a little bit about what it means if his arrest was illegal in Altoona, Pennsylvania. The reason why he was extradited to New York City for trial there federally and in the state was because of what was on him during his arrest in Altoona, Pennsylvania, primarily. So if the arrest in Altoona, Pennsylvania was illegal, one could argue the whole thing is in jeopardy. Now, let's be realist. The federal government is never going to let Luigi Mangione out of their sights. They're never going to just dismiss it because the original arrest may have been illegal in Altoona, Pennsylvania. That's never going to happen. Well, how could they not? Well, because what they'll argue is they had Luigi Mangione other ways. The worst thing that's going to happen, unfortunately, for people who are watching this and are Luigi Mangione supporters, is the worst thing that's going to happen is maybe they won't be able to present the confession letter saying, hey, feds, I did it by myself, and here's my confession. Maybe they won't be able to talk in court about the red notebook that they called a manifesto, because that was obtained illegally. So maybe they will have to make their entire case on video footage that supposedly places Luigi Mangione in New York City during the time of the crime. But they can't use the gun that was on him found in his evidence. They can't do those things. We will talk about probable cause. We will talk about that in detail. So just bear with me, please. We will get to it. I'm going to go through this document. I'm going to talk to you all about probable cause and what happened during that thing. Now, unfortunately, some of this tonight is going to be a recap of things you've already heard me say. I went into detail about what David Beatrice, the attorney that I used to follow on here. I can't follow him anymore. I think he's blocked me, unfortunately, and that's a whole nother story. We'll talk about that later. But the point being is that I used his summary of what this document said. Today I've got the document myself and I've read through it, so I no longer have to take the summary. So some of these things will be a repeat of the points that I made from David Beatrice's analysis, but now it's going to be from my own eyes and not just a repeat of what he said. All right? So I don't know if you want to see this. This is a copy. It's posted online. It's also on my website. I hope that paper didn't block my mouth. Devil's Advocates info, or devilsadvocates.info, there is a timeline called Luigi Timeline. On that timeline is a link to this document, which is the Omnibus Pretrial Hearing for Relief. It is the paperwork that that Thomas Dickey filed on behalf of his client Luigi to basically toss out and suppress. First of all, it's to release basically Luigi Mangione of habeas corpus, to release him from being in the custody or being under arrest by Pennsylvania, and then also to suppress all the information, all of the belongings, all of the evidence that they obtained against him in that illegal arrest. All right. So this document's available now online for everybody to read for themselves. Let's get into it. I'm going to flip a few pages because I didn't want to highlight everything in here. The defendant believes that the instant charges are not supported by prima facie case, so the petition's detention or confinement in the instant charges is illegal. What does that mean legally? So this is point 5 in this motion. The defendant believes that the instant charges are not supported by the prima facie case. What that basically means in simple terms is that they didn't have probable cause to make the arrest. That based on the information that they had when they detained him, it was not enough to make an arrest. That's what it basically says in simple terms. The defendant is claiming that when they decided to detain him, they did not have enough information to make that detention. And so therefore the detention was illegal because they only got enough information to arrest him after interrogating him for some time and goading him into making incriminating statements that they then used to arrest him. They did not have, on the initial approach, evidence or any support that would lend them to approach him in the manner they did, detain him, and then incriminate him and then interrogate him until he incriminated himself and got himself arrested. So I know that sounds a little legal mumbo jumbo, but that's the way I understand it. Any evidence therefore seized was obtained illegally and unlawfully for reasons set forth. That was point 6. Now, the defendant prays that the court issue a writ of habeas corpus and after requisite proceedings, grant relief. What that's saying is he's asking to basically be released from the fact that he's under custody or arrest by the Altoona, Pennsylvania law enforcement, and that everything that was seized by discharge, the defendant is basically claiming that they should discharge in whole and quash such charges that are not supported by the prima facie evidence. In other words, what you had wasn't enough to get it, and everything that you got after that, the false ID, the backpack, the gun, allegedly, the notebook, all that stuff should be tossed out because you didn't have enough reason to make the arrest in the first place. We're going to explain why they didn't, why I believe they didn't have the right to make the arrest in the first place. This is what the lawyer made an attempt for, and I know that people who want Luigi to go down for this are saying it's not illegal what the police did. I will argue with you why it was illegal what the police did. All right, point 13 in this document. So there's like a bunch of different paragraphs numbered. So number 13. This is going to get into the details that we've talked about a little bit, but let's talk about what just happened. Upon their arrival, Altoona Police Officer Detweiler immediately positioned himself to the right of the defendant and within an approximate arm's length of the defendant. This action was taken in order to detain and fully curtail the liberty of the defendant, Luigi Mangione. So what it basically says is they stood and they blocked him into a corner so he couldn't get past them and he couldn't move, effectively detaining Luigi Mangione. And the effect was to restrict the defendant's path of travel and ingress and egress from the table where he was sitting. In other words, they're making it so he can't come and go from the table. He's pinned in the corner. There's a chair between him and the officers. The two officers pinned him in the corner and made it so that Luigi could not move past the officers. I pointed this out before. I want to point it out again. If you have to push an officer out of your way to get past them, you have been detained because they will claim that you just assaulted them. So do you remember the whole, like, when you know, little brother and little sister, and the little brother puts his finger in his sister's face and goes, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. And then if you move because you're pissed off and you bump their finger, hey, you touched me, I didn't touch you. That's the same thing the officers are doing to Luigi Mangione. They're going to stand super close to him so he can't move. And then if he moves and touches him, you just assaulted me, you're down, motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? That's what that whole thing was. And that's what the attorney is basically arguing. They stood so close to him as to detain him effectively from moving, because if he would have touched those officers to try to leave, which he had to have, then he would have assaulted an officer and it would have been over. No explanation was given to the defendant, Luigi Mangione. So it just says defendant. I'm going to add Luigi Mangione so we're clear who the defendant is. You should know, but we're going to do that anyways. No explanation was given to the defendant relative to why the police were approaching him at McDonald's. At most, police indicated that he had looked suspicious and had overstayed his welcome as a patron at McDonald's. The document, by the way, points out that the defendant had been at McDonald's as a paying customer for approximately 30 minutes. So the officers, I want to make clear, the officers approached Luigi Mangione saying that he looked suspicious and had outworn his welcome at McDonald's because he had been there for a half hour. I would argue that any reasonable person in America would think that taking a half hour to eat your food is not ridiculous amount of time. Sure, some people eat fast and could have been out of there in 10 minutes. Some people eat slow. My wife, that would have been an hour-long breakfast.
What? Why are you picking on me?
I can't help it. She's a slow eater, I'm telling you. Point being is a half hour is not a crazy amount of time. And I guarantee, okay, I can't guarantee, that McDonald's probably has never called in the police because somebody stayed a half hour at their restaurant in Altoona, Pennsylvania. This was done for completely different reasons. And that's what they're saying, is that Luigi, they were coming there for different reasons and did not tell Luigi why he was being detained. The only explanation they gave him is that he had been there, that he looked suspicious, and had outworn his welcome at McDonald's. It is clear that Altoona Police, this is still from point 14, it is clear that Altoona Police provided a suspicious and unreasonable reason for approaching the defendant. To wit, it must be assumed that the defendant was being detained for an investigation to which he was not being informed. In other words, what his attorney is saying is, these officers are not there because he looks suspicious and has outworn his welcome at McDonald's because he's been there for 30 minutes. They're there for other reasons, and everyone knows it. But Luigi Mangione was not told why he was being detained. And now, on to the next page. I'm going to have to toss some papers off to the side. This is from point 15. The existence, position, and placement of the two Altoona police officers was intentionally done to further exhibit said officer's authority over the defendant. So in other words, the attorney says the entire reason why they stood so close to him was to exhibit their authority. They were there to show Luigi Mangione that they were in charge and he wasn't going anywhere. Point 16. At no time did the two officers indicate that Luigi Mangione, the defendant, was free to go, nor did they explain the reason why the defendant was being detained, other than he looked suspicious and or had overstayed his welcome as a customer at McDonald's. This is super important for you to keep in your mind. The entire time, the only thing that Luigi is being told is he's being approached because he's overstayed his welcome at McDonald's. He is specifically not told he is under investigation for something that happened in New York. This is important. He is not told that he's under investigation or suspicion for anything happening in New York. They're there because he looks suspicious and has outstayed his welcome as a patron at McDonald's because he's been there for 30 minutes. This is important. Point 17. Upon approaching the defendant, Officer Detweiler immediately made commands and instructions to the defendant, including but not limited to asking for his to provide his identification, telling him to stand up and place his hands on his head. The totality of these circumstances, including but not limited to the position and the demeanor of the mannerisms and the commands and the directives, instructions and other actions of the Altoona Police Department, showed that at no time the request for identification at the time that the identification for his identification was requested, that compliance with the request was somehow optional or was that is so I'm messed up with the way I wrote it. Basically what they're saying I could reread it, but I'm not going to. Basically what they're saying, at no time was he told that he could have resisted their request. They told him to stand up, put his hands on his head, provide identification to them. Okay, and at no time was Luigi Mangione ever given the presumption that he could leave or that he had the right to deny those requests. They were strong-arming him in the corner and exerting their authority over him and forcing him essentially to comply with their demands. I also want to point out something. What they did is they asked for identification, which he provided them, which was, we believe now, the false identification, the New Jersey identification of Mark Rosario. I'm going to cover again, so pay attention. I'm going to cover again why that was not a crime. You're like, how can that not be a crime? Didn't he just provide false identification to a police officer? That's a crime. Wait till you hear the law. Wait till you hear the law. It's a little shocking even to me when I read the law. And it's what Luigi Mangione's attorney, Thomas Dickey, is pointing out. Why even Luigi Mangione presenting the officers a false ID wouldn't have itself been a crime. And by the way, if it was a crime, and I'll tell you why I think it wasn't, according to the law that I understand, and I'm not a lawyer, but I'm going to tell you in layman's term what I think. Even if it was a crime, it's a misdemeanor, it's not a felony. Now, it still could, a misdemeanor could still lead to an arrest. It could still lead to prison time. But in Pennsylvania, presenting false ID to an officer at best is a misdemeanor, not a felony. It's a minor crime. But on top of that, it's not always illegal. And Thomas Dickey is going to explain why in this case it wasn't illegal. And by the way, later when they ask Luigi Mangione what his name is, when they actually ask him, so the way it reads on paper is, they asked him to give them identification, and he presented to them a driver's license of Mark Rosario. Then later, they ask him what his name is, and he says Luigi Mangione. And presumptuously, because of the two conflicts, that he gave them identification that said Mark Rosario, And because he gave them the name Luigi Mangione, therefore they concluded that he had given them false ID and that he had presented false ID to an officer, and therefore they were placing him under arrest. Again, I will show you why I believe the legal document shows, the legal precedent shows that he had not committed a crime. And I know it sounds nuts, so bear with me. So I'm going to go ahead and, let's see, let's cover... Oh yeah, I want to point out, I have a note here about the other IDs, other reasons for false identification. So one can argue, why would a person have a false ID on them if they're not doing something criminal, right? It's already been alleged by many documentaries on Luigi Mangione now that he was estranged from friends and family for 6 months, that he had gone off the radar, so to speak. So let me point this out, and I know that a lot of you don't like to play devil's advocates, but just because you don't want your friends and family to know where you are does not mean you're a criminal. And just because you want to fly under the radar and check into hotels under an assumed name because you don't want your family tracking you down because they might be filing missing person reports in San Francisco looking for you, just because you don't want your family to know where you're at does not mean you're a criminal. And it doesn't mean that you've committed a crime. A person has the right to not be known where they're at if they want to go under the radar. You can turn off your phone and say, I don't want people calling me. You can go on a vacation and say, I'm not telling you where I'm going. And in some cases, you can present false identification so that people can't trace where you're at because you just don't want to be bothered. It doesn't mean you've committed a crime. So the presumption, of course, that they want you to believe is that the whole reason why he's using a false ID is because he's about to commit murder. He might have just wanted to avoid his family for a while. For what reasons, we don't know yet. Point 19. Both officers from the Altoona Police Department continued to interrogate and question the defendant. These are important words. Interrogate and question the defendant without any reading of his Miranda rights, as required by both the Constitution of the United States as well as the Pennsylvania Constitution. These questions were designed to potentially incriminate the defendant, Luigi Mangione. So in other words, I have a lot of people on my comments that are telling me, police officers, hold one sec. Police officers have every right to question you. He wasn't under arrest at that point. They have every right to question you. But we will argue that they were interrogating him, trying to get him to incriminate himself so they would have reason to make the arrest. Yeah, go ahead.
Ella Marie brought up a point that celebrities make fake IDs.
Right. There's a lot of legal, I should say, there's a lot of legally allowed reasons for a fake identification. And again, I will get to when a fake ID is illegal and when it's not, according to the state of Pennsylvania, because that's where the arrest was made. So what we're going to read is a little section of the law about when it is illegal to use a false identification and when it's not. All right. Point 21. Officer Detweiler further directed and commanded the defendant to stand up in order to undergo a Terry frisk or a pat-down, although no circumstances existed at the time justifying said actions. It is averred that said actions were further performed in order to clearly exhibit the Altoona police officers' dominion and control over the defendant, as well as to further exhibit their power and authority over the defendant. So in other words, they're making a show of force. You will stand up. Put your hands on your head. We're going to frisk you now. They're clearly strong-arming Luigi to let them know they are in charge. And there's no implication that he has the right to resist this, that he has the right to leave, and he's also not being told why he has to comply. It's just understood, you must comply. A lot of people in America feel that if a police officer tells you something, you have to do it. And that's not the case. We have laws that state officers can't just come bully you. They can't just intimidate you. They have to do things properly. And I know that a lot of people that have a super love affair for the law enforcement are like, they're the good guys, so if they ask you to do something, you damn well better do it or they'll put a boot in your ass. It's not legal. It's totally not legal. Point 22. The Altoona Police Department took possession and control of the identification materials presented by the defendant and continued retention of this material. The positioning of law enforcement officers officers, personnel, and the retention of his personal identification materials for background check and evidence of criminal activity and or other investigative measures signals to a reasonable person that they are implicitly commanding that that person remain on scene while they do so. Okay, so what does this mean? It means when the officers took Luigi Mangione's ID, false identification by saying Mark Rosario, from him and didn't give it back to him, that he was not free to go. Because if he was free to go, they have to give you your ID back. So as long as the police officers are in possession of your identification, you're truly not free to go because you need to go with your possessions. They have taken his possessions, by the way, at this point, and taken his ID and not given them back to him. And it's not true that you can be, well, you're free to go, but you're going to go without your shit because we're keeping your shit. They can't do that. So if they've got your shit, you're not free to go. Point 22. The Altoona Police Department took possession and control of identification. We already kind of read that. Sorry. Point 23. At no point, Officer Detweiler at one point, Officer Detweiler walked outside the McDonald's while in possession of the identification materials. During that brief interval, Officer Fry remained with the defendant within arm's length and continued to curtail the liberty of the defendant, block his route and path of travel, ingress and egress, and movement from the dining table at the McDonald's. I've got multiple problems with this, and I realize we play devil's advocates and not everybody wants to play devil's advocates. But when the police officer takes his identification and leaves the building, and now Luigi Mangione cannot see what's happening with the identification, who's to say that when the identification comes back from being out of his sight, that it's not a different identification? We don't know for sure that Luigi Mangione presented the ID of Mark Rosario. What we do know is that the officer took his identification, left the building with it, and came back with it, and now it's Mark Rosario. We don't know if it was Mark Rosario when he first took it. The fact that he takes the ID out of Luigi's possession and sight and comes back with it, we don't know. Now you're like, oh, come on, dude. Come on. Law enforcement's not going to plant a fake driver's license. Do you realize how bad New York City wants Luigi Mangione back in New York City? Everyone has the proverbial you-know-what to get this guy back to New York City. So one could argue, if you have a corrupt police system, that they're going to want to get things in his possession that will give them cause to make an arrest. And at this point, they do not have cause to make an arrest. He's done nothing wrong other than outweigh his stay at McDonald's, which is not an arrestable offense. Make no mistake, there's no arrestable offense. Even if, at best, they could have said, you're trespassing, McDonald's doesn't want you on their property anymore, you need to leave. It's not an arrestable offense, even if that's what he was called for. But clearly, as Thomas Dickey has pointed out, those officers were not there because he had outstayed his welcome. They were there for other pretexts, and Luigi Mangione was not told the real reason they were there. Point 25 makes an interesting point at the end. An agent from the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office was also present. Just one sentence. There was an agent from the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office that was on site. By the way, while Luigi is undergoing 17 to 18 minutes of interrogation before his Miranda rights are read, more and more officers are showing up. At one point, it's described as a wall of 7 to 10 police officers that are now pinning Luigi Mangione into the corner, making it so that he can't leave, and he's still not under arrest and he's still not detained. Well, he is detained, but they're telling him he's not detained. Again, if he tried to push past an officer, it would have been assault, and that would be a whole different story.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are there body cams?
Nobody has seen the body cam footage. I'm not even sure that that his attorney has seen the body cam footage. His attorney maybe, let's make that clear. So, my wife was asking, have we seen the footage? No. Nobody in America that I know of has seen, well, somebody may have seen it in America, but nobody in the public has seen the body footage of the officers arresting Luigi Mangione. And I have already told you why, in my opinion, because they don't want you to see everything that we're talking about. That Luigi Mangione was not arrested properly. He was detained without having his Miranda rights read. He was bullied. He was intimidated. He was forced to comply with officers' demand until he incriminated himself with the statement, "I am Luigi Mangione." At that point, that's the only time that they even have a potential for probable cause, because they don't know that he's not Mark Rosario. If that's the ID that he handed them. Again, I'm not even 100% sure that the ID that he handed him was Mark Rosario. But if it was, and we can assume for the moment that there was, until he said, hey, my name's actually Luigi, they don't have a proof that he's committed some kind of false identification to police officers. But it's going to get bigger than that. The law is going to get bigger than that.
People are asking the location of the backpack.
The backpack was, I believe, beside him. He had a laptop on the table. He had a plastic bag, maybe presumably with the breakfast in it. I don't know.
And was it taken out of his sight?
Yes. The backpack was seized by law enforcement and put, and I don't know if I read that point, the law enforcement took his possessions, including his backpack, and they lifted it and put it behind the wall of officers, separating Luigi Mangione from his possessions. Before his arrest, before his official detention, before he was told he was under investigation, they separated him from his possessions and put the bag on the other side of a wall of police officers where he no longer had access to his items. Let's continue on. Point 26. A member of Altoona Police Department questioned the defendant about whether or not the backpack, plastic bag, and other items belonged to the defendant. At that time, the Altoona police officers seized the items and packages, so I was getting to that point, seized the items and packages and placed them in an area behind law enforcement personnel. At all times, therefore, there remained Altoona police officers stationed between the defendant and the items of property believed to belong to the defendant. These items of property remained in the control of the Altoona Police Department throughout. The defendant believes that this action further supports his belief that he was not free to leave. So another point to point out that Luigi Mangione is maintaining. No, I did not have the presumption that I could leave anytime I want to. You took my ID and you didn't give it back. You took my possessions and put it behind a wall of 10 officers and didn't give it back. I can't leave without my stuff. You are detaining me. Point 27. In order for the defendant to exit the dining table to venture to the service area of McDonald's, he would have to have passed no less than approximately 7 to 10 members of Altoona Police Department and or other law enforcement personnel. At this time, it is believed that there was in excess of 10 law enforcement personnel surrounding the defendant in this small dining room. It again became abundantly clear that the defendant's curtailment of liberty, seizure, and unlawful detention and custody continued by this group of law enforcement personnel. No reasonable person would have believed that they were free to leave. And I think that's obvious. Unless you're just completely being stubborn, nobody in their right mind would think that if you've got 10 officers surrounding you and pinning you in the corner and they're standing between you and your stuff and still holding your ID, that you're just free to go whenever you want to. I don't know why you didn't leave. If you weren't, you don't have to talk to us. You're not under arrest. Why didn't you just leave? Assault is why. Because you would assault an officer trying to push back past 10 officers. Point 28. During this period of custody, various members of the Altoona Police Department continued to interrogate the defendant with the intention of obtaining incriminating statements from the defendant. The totality of the circumstances presented by the Altoona Police Department again make it clear that the defendant was in custody and that the actions of the Altoona Police Department constituted a custodial interrogation of the defendant. Both police officers from Altoona Police Department continued to interrogate and question the defendant without any reading of his Miranda rights as required by the Constitution of the United States as well as the Pennsylvania Constitution. These questions were designed to potentially incriminate the defendant. Again, the argument the officers, his attorney is making is he was never told he was under suspicion for anything. He was never told he was under suspicion in New York. He was never told anything like that. He was told that he had outstayed his welcome at McDonald's, and then they continued to detain him by pinning him in the corner and interrogating him and questioning him until he gave some incriminating evidence, some incriminating statement. That incriminating statement was, I'm Luigi Mangione, after allegedly he presented ID saying he was Mark Rosario. So they were like, now we got you. So they intimidated and they coerced him and they gave him the impression that he had to comply to their answers, including a pat down, hands on your head, all these things, without placing him formally under arrest until he said something that they could arrest him for. Point 29. In excess of 15 minutes had passed and the defendant's unlawful detention, seizure, curtailment of liberty and custody, and the interrogation continued. he still had not been given any information as to why he was being held. This continued curtailment of the defendant's liberty, seizure, and unlawful detention and custody of the defendant was in violation of the contravention of the Fourth Amendment, the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, and under Article 1, Section 8 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. So now his lawyer is, flat out stating the laws that were broke, the U.S. Constitution and Pennsylvania Constitution laws that the police had violated by detaining him without probable cause, because they still didn't have probable cause. Finally, point 31, after approximately 15 minutes of the defendant's unlawful detention, seizure, and continued custody, was he advised by Officer Detweiler that he was officially under police investigation. He was not read his Miranda rights at that time. The defendant was then asked who he was, at which time the defendant replied that he was Luigi Mangione. He was further interrogated by members of the Altoona Police Department. Make sure you understand what's happening. For 15 minutes at least, Luigi Mangione is being questioned and interrogated, told to stand, pat down, hands on head, give me your ID, and they're looking for a reason to make an arrest, but they don't have one yet. And then they ask him, who are you? And he says, Luigi Mangione, and that's when they feel like they have enough for arrest, because now they're like, well, that's not the ID you gave us. You've presented false identification to an officer. We're placing you under arrest. All that detention and interrogation and questioning to get somebody to implicate themselves in a crime is illegal. That's the argument that his attorney's making. And it's not just fluff. These are rights any of us should have. Police can't just come and make you talk until you incriminate yourself, until you say something that makes them, now I got you. Because otherwise they do that to a lot of things. They'll just keep talking to you until they talk you into circles and make you make a mistake. Yeah, I got you. I'll talk you into circles until you make a mistake, and now I can put you under arrest. They can't do that. After approximately 2 more minutes, so I want to make this clear. The officer did not at that time, even when he said, I'm Luigi Mangione, the officer did not at that time tell him he was under arrest. At that time, the officer told him that he was under investigation. He was officially under investigation. Not under arrest, under investigation. This is the first time that Luigi Mangione in 15 minutes or so has been told that they're investigating him for something that really doesn't have anything to do with overstaying his welcome at McDonald's. After approximately 2 more minutes of interrogation, a member of the Altoona Police Department read his Miranda rights. At the conclusion of the reading of the Miranda rights, the defendant was asked if he would like to speak to police, at which time the defendant shook his head, and the officer immediately stated to the defendant that you're not in custody. I want you to understand what just happened. We're all acting like Luigi sang like a songbird when they came in and approached him. You know when Luigi stopped talking to the police? When they read him his Miranda rights. When they said, you have the right to remain silent. Now would you like to talk to us? And he's like, he didn't even say yes. He shook his head. He was done because they had read him his Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Now, you want to talk to us? Nope. Didn't even say no. He's done. Done talking. And to basically avail his fears, they supposedly said, hey, you're not in custody. And point 33, this statement, you're not in custody, is materially false, inaccurate, and contrary to the law. It is clear at this time that the defendant was in fact in custody and had in fact been in custody since his illegal and unlawful seizure, detention, curtailment of liberty. Again, this unlawful seizure, detention, and curtailment of his liberty was in violation of the Fourth Amendment, 14th Amendment, and Article 1, Section 8 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. I have to now prove that I'm a human being. Thank you, TikTok. All right, let's continue on. Statement 34. After the defendant shook his head, indicating that he did not want to talk to police, the Altoona Police Department continued to question him. This is bullshit. At the point that you've stated, I don't want to talk to you, they continued to question him. Again, a violation. Anybody who watches cop shows in America knows that at the time that you lawyer up or you say, I'm not speaking until I speak to a lawyer, or I'm not speaking at all, they say, okay, that's your right. And they're done. They'll walk out of the room. That's what you see on TV, at least. They're done. They have to. They can't continue to question you after you've said and stated you do not intend to talk to them. But they did. They continued to interrogate him after he told them he doesn't want to speak to them. What's not clear in this omnibus pretrial hearing for relief is whether Luigi did talk to them at any point. Because what I'm pointing out to you is, according to this document right here, Luigi Mangione stopped talking to the police officers once his Miranda rights were read and they said, "You have the right to remain silent. Do you want to continue talking to us?" And he shook his head no. I can presume he's done talking to the police, but they continued to ask him questions. All right, let's continue on the end point of paragraph 34. A photograph was then taken of Luigi Mangione, but it doesn't say Luigi, it says of him. A photograph was then taken of him by an agent of the Pennsylvania Office of Attorney General. I got to ask a couple questions. Why the hell is there a member of the Attorney General's office of Pennsylvania at the McDonald's during Luigi Mangione's arrest for staying too long for a hash brown? And why is the member, the agent of the Attorney General's office of Pennsylvania taking a photograph of Luigi Mangione? I'll tell you why. Because it's a trophy. We got the bad guy. It was Pennsylvania. We got our guy and I was there. I got a picture of Luigi Mangione in cuffs standing at McDonald's. This is going to go on my wall at home and my family's going to be like, I'm a badass. I was there when it happened. That's my opinion. I mean, I can't prove that. But I want to know, why does an agent of the Attorney General's office need to take a photograph real quick of Luigi Mangione? It's a trophy, in my opinion.
So Priscilla wants to know, at 9:30 a.m. that they were in McDonald's, but it was 6:30 when he was arrested.
6:30 p.m. when he was arrested, you say?
That's what Priscilla says.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that fits. Priscilla, I don't think what my wife just stated fits what this document says. He was arrested within about 18 minutes of being approached by the officers. So I don't know where you got that time frame. Maybe we'll have to talk about that at the very end. Now we're going to get to that point I've been teasing for an hour now about the law and about whether or not it's illegal for someone to present fake ID to police officers and the nuances and the gray area of the law on this issue. Here's what point 35 says. Approximately 7 minutes later, the defendant was physically removed from McDonald's according to police records, being placed under arrest and taken into custody for the crime of providing false identification to law enforcement and transported to the Altoona Police Department. Said arrest was illegal and unlawful at this time insofar as the defendant did not commit the crime of false identification to a law enforcement officer in violation of 18 PA-CS 4914A. Okay, that piqued my attention. What Luigi's attorney is saying is Luigi Mangione did not present false identification to a police officer. Well, wait a minute. We've all been repeating this over and over and over again. Well, he did present false identification to a police officer. That's why they arrested him. But this document says that he did not prevent false identification to a police officer. And it cited the law as to why he did not present false ID to a police officer. So I had to look up the law. This shit's super interesting. So pay attention. Under 18 PA-CS 4914A, a person commits an offense if they provide false information about their identity to law enforcement authorities after being informed by a uniformed officer or officer who has identified himself as law enforcement that they are a subject of an official investigation and of a legal violation. There's your key. It is not illegal to present false identification to an officer unless you did it after you've been told you're under investigation for committing a crime. Luigi Mangione was not told he was under investigation for committing a crime. In fact, he was repeatedly told he wasn't being detained and he's not under investigation, or that he's only there for such and such. The point being is that the law specifically states it's only against the law to provide false identification to a law enforcement once they have identified themselves as law enforcement and told you that you're under investigation. They had not told Luigi he was under investigation. Sorry, I'm shouting. I just get super excited about this kind of stuff. It's super interesting to learn about the law. So by the definition of that law, Luigi Mangione did not present false identification to a police officer because he was not told he was under investigation. Let's continue with that law, though. In the case of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, this is actually an interpretation of that law. In the case of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Mr. Kitchen or Mrs. Kitchen, I'm not sure which one, the Pennsylvania Superior Court addressed the application of this statute. The court concluded that for a conviction under this sentence, or this section, the individual must explicitly be informed by law enforcement that they are under investigation, and more implication or assumption, and mere implication or assumption is insufficient. The court said specifically, an officer must tell you or you are under investigation, and it can't be implied. It must be explicitly stated. You are under investigation, give me your ID, and then it would become a crime because you've been told you're under investigation. Are you getting the nuances? It's super important. This is saying Luigi Mangione did not commit a crime by submitting false identification saying he was Mark Rosario, if that's what he did, because he was not told he was under investigation. If law enforcement had said, you're under investigation for a murder in New York, what's your name? Oh, here, I'm Mark Rosario. That would be a crime. But not what they did, because he was never told he was under investigation. Here's a little other side tangent of Pennsylvania law. It's a misdemeanor, not a felony. It's only a misdemeanor. Even if you were told by law enforcement that you're under investigation, presenting that identification, false identification, police, is a misdemeanor. It's a quote-unquote minor crime. Yes, you can still spend some time in jail, but it's a misdemeanor. It's not even a felony. Therefore, under Pennsylvania law, providing false identification to law enforcement is a criminal offense, but a conviction requires clear communication from the officer that the person is under an official investigation. Luigi Mangione was never told he was under investigation for anything at the point they asked him for that fake ID. Therefore, according to what I interpret as an armchair legal guy, because I'm not a lawyer, the law states he did not commit a crime because he was not told he was under investigation. This document clearly states he was not told he was under investigation until 15 minutes after interrogation and long after they had gotten his ID. Only then did they tell him that he was under investigation. That's the big takeaway I hope you take from this. Go talk to lawyers, find out if I'm wrong. Here's the problem when you're talking to lawyers, though. Lawyers know where you're going with it. Oh, trust me. That guy's going down. He did it. Like, I don't give a shit what you feel about the matter. Did he break the law? By the way, it gets really super nuanced. Let me try. You know how hard it is to get somebody to tell you a straight answer? So I asked the question. So, to clarify, in Pennsylvania, is it legal to present a false identification to a police officer if you're not under investigation? The first answer I got when I was querying this was yes. If you're under the age of 21 and you use a false identification to buy alcohol, that is still illegal. It's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking is, if you present a false identification to an officer, is it illegal? Yes. If you've been informed that you're under investigation and you provide false identification, that is illegal. It's like, I couldn't get a straight answer. The answer is, it is not illegal unless you're using a fake ID because you're a minor and you're trying to buy alcohol, or if you are being told that you're under investigation by police officers and you provide them false identification to avoid being, caught for the crime in which you're being investigated. But that's not what happened, again, because Luigi Mangione was not told that he was under investigation. Point 38. At the McDonald's, police also discovered a clip containing bullets, which was wrapped in some undergarments. At that time, the Altoona Police Department decided to repack the backpack and take it to the Altoona Police Department for further searches and seizures. Repack? I mean, I realize I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist and a devil's advocates kind of guy, but when the police take your possessions, start going through it, and then repack your bag before taking it to be booked into evidence, what got repacked in there that wasn't in there originally? Oh, you're an asshole, man. Please don't plant evidence. That's not going to happen. You can't tell me as a reasonable person that New York State doesn't want Luigi back so bad they can taste it. And if they're getting wind that Luigi Mangione is being detained in a McDonald's, and if they can get something in that backpack when you repack the backpack that gives them reason to bring him to New York State, I, as a reasonable person, have no reason to doubt that they would get something repacked in that backpack that gives New York the ability to bring him to New York City. Something that would make him, that they could get him for in New York City. Point 38. At the Altoona Police Department, the police continued to search the backpack, resulting in the seizure of numerous items, including but not limited to a 9mm handgun, printed lower receiver, a mechanized upper receiver, a suspected 3D printed suppressor, a red notebook, and this is in parentheses in the legal document, referred to and titled by a police officer as a manifesto, and multiple handwritten notes. This is important. We use the word manifesto because only people who do horrible crimes write manifestos. Nutbags write manifestos. So he had a red notebook in his possession, and the police officer titled the red notebook a red manifesto. I bet you money Luigi doesn't have Luigi Mangione's manifesto written on the front of that notebook. No. A police officer on his own, because he wanted to make Luigi look guilty, wrote it in the evidence as a red notebook that is a manifesto. And it specifically states by Dickey's thing, a police officer called it a manifesto, which to me means it doesn't call it a manifesto. Luigi, if he even wrote that notebook, if that notebook wasn't repacked into his possessions, didn't write this as a manifesto. A police officer titled it manifesto. Because manifesto makes you look guilty. Defendant, this is number 40, point 40. Defendant avers that the search and seizure of items at the Altoona Police Department was in violation of protections afforded to the defendant via the defendant avers that the search and seizure was illegal and unlawful, and then they list again the 4th Amendment, 14th Amendment, and Article 1, Section 8 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. By the way, I didn't highlight this, but it was mentioned before. The police officers even went to the point of there was an item in Luigi's backpack that was wrapped in duct tape, and the police officers used a knife to cut open the duct tape and search what was inside of that packaged item without proper search warrants. One could argue opening up you could maybe make the case opening up the backpack to see if there's something dangerous in it, like a bomb. That could be inspected, I guess, by first look. But taking a knife out and cutting through to duct tape to see what's inside something duct taped, that would require a search warrant. But no search warrant was given for that.
I have a question.
You have a question.
So since he had a pistol, I assume that he did not have a concealed carry. Would that give them probable cause? Of course, they'd still have to say something, right?
Right. So I don't know if you guys heard my wife, but she was asking about does the possession of the gun have probable cause? The problem with it is, yes. So they did cite that one of the charges against Luigi Mangione was possession of a firearm unlawfully, that he didn't have a permit for that weapon. Now, here's where there's multiple gray areas. One, they wouldn't have known he had a gun if they hadn't illegally seized his material in the first place. They searched his backpack illegally, so they wouldn't have even known he had a gun on him. And the way we work in this country is you can't just go illegally find something. You can't just break into my house illegally, look around for something illegal and say, well, you are a criminal because I found drugs in your house, so therefore we're arresting you for drugs. And be like, well, why'd you come into my house in the first place? Well, we were just seeing if there was anything we could find on you. You can't do that. So they didn't have a right to look for the gun in the first place. But once they did feel that they had a right to find it, then they charged him with gun possession issues. But here's the thing. This is a gray area we don't talk about a lot. In some places, owning a 3D printed gun is considered a hobbyist thing. Some places don't even consider that a gun. It's a hobbyist thing. It may not even be a pistol or qualified as a pistol. I haven't looked into Pennsylvania state law to see if a 3D printed gun is considered a firearm or not. It could be a hobbyist type thing. So we may be leading down some kind of weird gray area with the fact that it was a 3D printed gun in the first place. It may fall under a different thing. It may not even be classified as a firearm, or it may. We'll see. And so it states at the end here that they're asking for the suppression of evidence that would include but not be limited to the original document identification card that was seized of the defendant during the initial encounter. So they're basically saying you can't even keep or use at all the Mark Rosario fake ID because you had no grounds for taking it in the first place. Anything that was listed in the items Exhibit B, which is all the items of his backpack, which, by the way, I'm going to cover some of those things that were found in his backpack. It has a human interest point of some of the things they don't talk about that was in that backpack. And I think people would just be curious, what kind of stuff did Luigi actually have on him? It wasn't just a gun, a notebook, and a letter to the feds. There were other things in there. It might be interesting to you. Who knows? And so they want to toss out They want to toss out the ID, the fake ID, everything that was found in the backpack, illegally searched and seized, and all statements made by the defendant. Why all statements made by the defendant? Because you know what? Luigi Mangione shut up when they said, you have the right to remain silent, and he stopped talking. So anything he said before then was basically interrogation techniques to try to get Luigi Mangione to incriminate himself so they could make an arrest. All right.
Your ears need smell-o-vision. You smell really good.
So I'm going to cover briefly now what was found in the backpack, the items that were listed in his backpack, because some of them I found were interesting. And then my wife hopefully has been keeping me up on most of the comments. And then we'll go, and then I'll start watching the comments, and we'll go maybe take somebody live if you want to or whatever, and we'll have a conversation. But you've got the gist of it. Again, I want to remind you that I do have all this stuff. I'll be posting it online on my website, the link to this document so you can read it verbatim yourself. If you want to question my wording, all those things will be there. So of the things that they listed in evidence on this form, handwritten by an officer with some kind of bad handwriting, I'm not trying to besmirch him. I got horrible handwriting. A red notebook that... I need my glasses for this because it's tiny print by an officer's handwriting that's a little sloppy. A red notebook, manifesto, and multiple handwritten letters or notes. That was one of the items. Item number 2, a 9mm black Ghost handgun. Item number 3, U.S. passport, Maryland identification, 3 cards or debit credit cards for Luigi Mangione. So I thought that was interesting. Luigi had ID of himself in that backpack as well. Not just like my ring light that you can see highlighted in my my glasses. Anyways, so Luigi had his own ID and debit cards on him as well as a U.S. passport in his name, not Mark Rosario's name. Item number 4, handmade 3D printed silencer. Item number 5, 1 9mm magazine with 12 rounds, 3 of which were hollow point. Item number 6, 1 U.S. currency in the amount of $7,807. Item number 7, foreign currency in the amount of $1,620. Item number 8. By the way, those 2 items, you remember, this is famous. Luigi Mangione in court, when they were reading the list of items for the indictment for New York and why they were bringing him to New York, listed one of the reasons why they were bringing him to New York was because of this threat of fleeing, that he had a passport on him and he had a whole shit ton of cash, both foreign currency and U.S. currency. And one of the only things Luigi said was, I don't know anything about that money. It must be planted. No shit. Maybe it was repacked into his possessions. Why? Because New York City needed to have a reason to bring him back to New York. Luigi Mangione stated that money was not his. It probably got repacked in his backpack when they repacked his backpack because New York needed to have a reason to bring him back. And the threat of fleeing the country with a passport and a shit ton of cash would make him a flight risk. But what if he didn't have that money on him? All right, let me put my old man glasses back on. Item number 9, a Polaroid digital camera and mini hard drive / USB. Item number 10, a medical mask, a watch, a pin, a rope, a flashlight LED. Oh, sorry, a flashlight and $1.67 in cash, apparently. I guess that's in addition to the $7,807 in cash. I don't know why that's separated. I guess it was in 2 different areas. Item number 11, a USB from a wallet. Interesting. Item number 12, a USB on a necklace. Super interesting. Why does this guy have so many USB sticks on him and computer chips? By the way, when they cut open the package that was sealed in duct tape, apparently it contained a computer chip. So we've got a lot of this weird tech on Luigi Mangione, supposedly. USB sticks, a thumb drive, a computer chip that they call it, which may be just a SAN disk. We'll get into that. Item number 12, a CVS receipt. I believe that's CVS pharmacies, so he's got a pharmacy receipt in his bag. Item number 14, USB ×2, mini SIM card. A lot of tech. Item number 15, a pocket knife, a screwdriver, and baggies and zip ties. Oh no, he had zip ties on him. He was probably going to tie somebody up and commit a murder. I'm just being sarcastic. This is the way they run with anything. Well, why would you have zip ties unless you were going to handcuff somebody with zip ties? There's a million reasons to have zip ties. Doesn't make you a killer. Item number 16, a Best Buy receipt. Curiosity gets me. Did he buy all these USB thumb drives, disk drives, SAN disks, digital cameras? I'm assuming the SAN disk is just an SD card that's in the camera for the Polaroid camera. Item number 17, a Greyhound bus ticket from Philly to Pittsburgh. I thought that was interesting. I thought that was super interesting. In the early stages, they were saying Luigi Mangione arrived on a bus from such and such place, and we're not sure where he got on. But apparently he has in his possessions a bus ticket from Philly to Pittsburgh. Item number 18, a fake New Jersey driver's license, which presumably is Mark Rosario. A quick trip ticket, or truck, I'm not sure, it's spelled weird. And a Visa gift card. Two handwritten notes. That was all listed as item 19, or 18. Item 19, medical face masks, 25 count. So he had a box of surgical masks. Okay. Item number 20, handwritten note from a backpack. Doesn't say what's on that note. I'm super curious what that is about. Item number 22, a MacBook Pro laptop. Item number 23, a black jacket. Item number 24, a green jacket, a brown beanie, black gloves, a black belt, and then it just says black something. There's nothing there. Now this is super interesting to me. So we know we've seen photos allegedly of Luigi Mangione wearing a green jacket, and we've seen Luigi Mangione wearing what appears to be a brown jacket, and we've seen Luigi Mangione wearing what appears to be a black jacket. On him, they say at the time of his arrest, is a green jacket, a brown jacket, and also, what I find super weird, is a pair of black gloves. Why on earth, pray tell me, did the shooter not wear gloves during the shooting of Brian Thompson if he had a pair of black gloves on him? I'm just super interested. Like, I don't know what the answer to that question is. But logic tells me, if you're going to commit a crime that you think you're going to get away with, why aren't you wearing the gloves? So if Luigi Mangione is walking around with a pair of black gloves in his backpack, why didn't he wear it during the commission of the crime? Why also do we see him putting some kind of object down with fingerprints on it for the police to find at the scene of the crime? I have alleged that I think those items were placed on purpose. I know some people think that's nutbaggish and conspiracy theorist sounding, but I'm going to play devil's advocates and say maybe he's working, or maybe people are working together in concert and they placed evidence to put basically identification of other people where it could be found and lead the law enforcement off on wild goose chases. And whether that's Luigi Mangione or not, we don't know. I want to say there's one more page of with a few items. Oh yeah, here it is. A few more items.
Somebody's asking if they found a cell phone on him.
Let's talk about the cell phone. We're almost at the cell phone. I found that super interesting. Did I miss that on the line? There was a line. Did I miss it about the iPhone? He was found with the cell phone on him. Oh yeah, line number 21. iPhone with no SIM card. I find that super interesting. At the scene of the crime, supposedly we heard that the shooter had dropped his cell phone and had fingerprints on the cell phone, or at least a partial on the cell phone. Can people have more than one cell phone? Surely, absolutely. But I'm curious about Luigi Mangione's iPhone with no SIM card in it. The SIM card was found in his bag? Maybe. Remember, they did say that there was what they called a computer chip found inside a duct tape piece of something wrapped in duct tape. So, could it have been that? Could it have been a new phone and the SIM card was just in the bag? Good questions. Those are great questions. I'm not necessarily implying anything nefarious because he had a phone with no SIM card. I'm just finding it interesting and worth asking questions about. Let's finish up this list. Item number 24, underwear or Under Armour leggings. Under Armour leggings. Number 25, a black backpack with clothing, hair clippings, and food wrappers.
Hair clippings?
Hair clippings. Yep. Item number 25, black backpack with clothing, hair clippings, food wrappers, and wireless earphones. Why is the food wrappers interesting to me? Some people have speculated, and I understand this is super conspiracy theory sounding and all that stuff, but some people have asked the question, is the food wrappers things like the Kind Bar wrapper? They're using the Kind Bar wrapper and a water bottle as items that were left near, not at, near the scene of the crime with fingerprints all over it. 5 fingerprints, I think they said, on the bottle and 3 on the Kind wrapper, or vice versa. And some people, maybe even one of my guests here on the live right now, asked the question, if there are more people involved, is it possible that the shooter or the suspect, who's the shooter, had a wrapper, like a Kind wrapper, with somebody else's prints on it and left it at the scene to finger somebody else for the crime? Could the person have purposely placed a water bottle down to be found with 5 prints of somebody else on it so that somebody else would be fingered for the crime? Yeah, that was Lady Capulet. And it was a great question. A super great question. Item 26 and 27 are the last 2 on the thing, and then we will go to more questions and live interaction maybe. Item number 26, black shoes. Item number 27, black jeans, black neck guard. I would, if I'm guessing, black neck guard may be the black gaiter they're suggesting that the shooter seemed to be wearing. It's interesting as well that Luigi Mangione allegedly is seen with a blue kind of surgical mask on inside of a taxi, a blue surgical mask looking thing at the hostel, a blue surgical mask sort of thing at the Altoona, Pennsylvania McDonald's. But during the shooting, the shooter was wearing a black gaiter of sort that seemed to be pulled up, right? Now they're saying some kind of black neck thing, maybe a gaiter, is found in Luigi's possessions. Now, if I was a conspiracy theorist, I would say if they had the black gaiter from New York and they needed to tie Luigi back to New York somehow, that's another item that could be easily repackaged in Luigi's possessions when they have possession of his stuff and go through his stuff and repackage it, that would tie him to the scene. Maybe food wrappers could tie him to the scene. So, that's the gist of my super long spiel tonight. Let me try to summarize some of the key points. Start watching your comments so that you can have your chance for some feedback. Maybe take somebody live on with me if you want to come up to the live. Lately, I've been inviting people to come up live because it seems like they're being suggested or that they want to come up, and then they're like, I didn't ask to come up. So I don't even know if TikTok now is just telling me, hey, so-and-so might want to come live, and they don't even ask to come live. But I'm welcome to have people up here. So the summary of things today were my big points. Bryan Kohberger's case about how they want to take the death penalty off the thing because he may have some form of autism, and on the spectrum, if you will. Also, the way in which the FBI obtained the DNA match, because the FBI already had Bryan Kohberger's name and told the lab that they need to make a connection, they need to find a connection to Bryan Kohberger because Bryan Kohberger is the man we want to get, essentially. And then Luigi Mangione's full Omnibus Pretrial Hearing for relief. I can't believe I keep getting that right off the top of my head because it's a mouthful. And I keep thinking I'm going to screw that up 6 ways from Sunday. I think I've screwed it up a couple times, but most of the time I'm getting it right. Who was the person who called the police, and who are they really? I don't know. I mean, I think I did see a video of an old guy that was talking his story about how him and his buddy were in there, and his buddy said, hey, that looks like the guy from New York. I think that's nuts. Most of us who have seen the pictures of Luigi Mangione allegedly online could never have placed the guy in Altoona, Pennsylvania at the McDonald's as being the same guy that they're looking for on those photos. So I think it's asinine to suggest that somebody in that thing said, that looks just like the guy on the video from the hostel. I'm not buying that at all. But that's the official story. And I think they interviewed that guy. Yeah, I was just with my buddy, and he was like, hey, this guy seems to look like that guy they're looking for in New York. Which, by the way, I want to point this out. So important you brought that up. Thank you. If it's true that a patron called the police or had a McDonald's employee, because allegedly what it was is an employee basically was told by a patron about this person, and the employee went and called the police. But if the reason for the call was because, hey, he looks like that guy from New York, Altoona has a major problem. Because at no time when the police officers came up and started to interrogate Luigi Mangione was he informed that he was under investigation for anything happening in New York. But that is probably exactly why they were there. Because someone said, hey, I think this is the guy from New York. I have my own theory. I think Luigi Mangione was already being tailed, and the person who called in the tip that Luigi Mangione is in New York is not even, they're affiliated with law enforcement. I think Luigi Mangione was already being tailed by law enforcement, FBI or whatever. They wanted to get him back to New York. And so what they did is they had somebody call in a mysterious tip and say, isn't that the guy from New York? Yeah.
Lululemon has interesting post.
Lululemon, she said, I missed a good post from.
NYPD inventoried the bag 8.5 hours after arrest, but announced evidence 4.5 hours before inventory.
Interesting, yeah. I have taken exception also with what was listed initially in the inventory. One list that I saw didn't list some of the things that I saw in this longer list now. That longer list seemed to come out when New York brought him to New York, and there was all of a sudden there was an extra long list of things that were found on the initial discovery. So exactly when that happened, we're not sure. But that's a good point. When they inventoried the bag and when those items showed up in his possession is a big mystery. It's a big question. And I want to point out, I have a general distrust for law enforcement. And I don't necessarily blame someone in some regards. If they really believe that this man killed somebody in New York, they want to make sure he goes down for it. And so I could see how somebody would think they're doing the right thing by planting a piece of evidence, as small as it may be, to make it so that we can get that guy back to New York for the crime we know he did. One could make a reasonable, I can see how somebody would think they're doing the right thing doing that. But it's totally illegal, and it's not how our justice system works, or it's not how it's supposed to work. I would argue that it is exactly how our system works. But the question is, did that happen? I don't know. There was a long period of time in which that bag was in evidence, and who knows who had access to it. We already know that the Attorney General's office sent an agent to look into this and take a photo op of Luigi Mangione being arrested. They knew this was a big deal. By this time, FBI, New York, they're all over knowing that this man's been picked up. They're all over it. So if hours and hours go by before they inventory the case, it is easy to assume, if there's a bad actor, that some bit of evidence might end up in Luigi's possessions and inventoried into evidence that may not have been there at first. Great observations and questions. Let me point out to you as well, I in no way believe that if the arrest in Altoona, Pennsylvania was illegal, that means that Luigi is going to be released out of jail in the next few days. Even if the judge in Altoona, Pennsylvania agrees that his constitutional rights were violated and they had no authority to detain him or get his possessions, at the end of the day, what it really is probably going to mean is that New York will not be able to use the items that were found on Luigi Mangione as part of their discovery and part of their case against him. In other words, the jury, if they can find a jury who's never heard this information, who's never heard that Luigi Mangione was found with the gun on him, a jury will be seated that may never hear that. That jury may never be told, hey, by the way, he was found with a confession letter, the gun in his possession, bullets in his possession, false ID, money to flee the country, and a passport. The jury will never hear that. If in God's green earth, you can find a jury who's never heard about the Altoona arrest and what happened there. But if all that stuff was illegal, the trial will go forward, but a jury may never find out that Luigi had that stuff on him. So that's the best case, in my opinion, for Luigi Mangione. I just want to make it clear that regardless of how I feel about the matter, Luigi's still going to undergo trial and he's still going to be facing all these charges. But they may not be able to use any of the evidence that was found on him at the time of his arrest. And they may have to do a lot of mental gymnastics to figure out how they could finger him for the crime without that arrest. And sorry about the dog. We have some issues with the dog. That's probably why they are going around now talking about the evidence on all these documentaries. Right. When will the judge respond to the motion? Don't know. It's under review, and I would imagine that judge is a little terrified right now. He's going to make a decision on the biggest case that this country has seen in a long time. That judge is going to be probably under an enormous amount of pressure to get it right. And he's going to have to review case law, and he's going to have to make a defense of his position or her position. I believe it's a male. As a judge, I think it's judge. I think it's Judge in Pennsylvania, is going to have to really think about his decision of how he's going to weigh in on this and justify it, because he could become public enemy number one either way. If he says that the law officers didn't violate Luigi's constitutional rights and the rest of us think that they did, he's going to have some problems. And if he says that you have to toss out everything they had on him, the federal government's going to have some problems with that judge. So we're going to see. It's super interesting. How long does it usually take? I don't know. I would imagine it could take a couple weeks to review those things, but that's a guess. Oh, Judge was in Idaho. I follow too many cases. Pardon me. Is it Caro, or is that oh my gosh, I better stop guessing names. Maybe Caro was the federal judge in Luigi's case. Tell me who the judge is in Pennsylvania. Is it male or female? I don't know. So somebody just pointed out. This is what I get. Somebody just pointed out he gave them fake ID and that's why he was booked and searched. I don't know if you missed this entire live, but we went through a massive amount of the legal document that shows the law that states that presenting false ID to the officers was not illegal. So yes, it is true. The pretext under which the officers made the arrest was that he presented false identification to law enforcement, but that was not illegal according to his attorney. And I read the law and explained why it was not illegal based on my armchair analysis of that law. Other questions, comments? Anybody want to come on live and blast me for getting something wrong or saying I did something right or whatever?
Don't be so negative.
I know. I just waiting to be torn apart by somebody. Do you think they have a high chance of getting the evidence suppressed? I think it should be suppressed. I think it may. I think it may be suppressed. I honestly think there's yes. If you ask me my opinion, is there a high chance? Yeah, there might be a high chance. What I see is a clear violation of Luigi Mangione's rights. Now, here's the kicker. I don't know that Thomas Dickey has seen the body cam footage either. He may not have seen it. He may be basing his complaint based on what Luigi Mangione himself told them happened during his arrest. And if so, he may not have seen the body cam footage to verify that it's true. But he may have every reason to believe that his client is telling the truth. So, if it turns out that the body cam footage indeed shows what Luigi said happened, or that his attorney alleged happened, I believe, yes, there's a high chance that almost everything they found on him is tossed out. No jury should be allowed to hear that he had a printed gun on him, that he had cash to flee the country, that he had a passport, any of that, because all of that was illegally obtained. Yeah?
Life is Good said that Altoona Police Department wanted him to sign that he was treated fairly and thought that might be part of the process that took so long for his arrest.
And he didn't sign those documents?
I guess not. I don't
yeah.
know.
I can't really say much about that other than thank you for bringing it to my attention. I would imagine, sure, that the Altoona Police Department would love Luigi Mangione to sign off on they did everything properly. So if they did ask him that, and if he didn't sign it, good on him, because it wasn't done properly. And this is, like I said, I mean, someone else pointed this out earlier. Karen Agnifilo in court in state of New York versus...
Saying he refused to sign it.
He refused to sign it. Okay, yeah, good for him. So that they want to cover your ass thing. They want to be able to say, oh, I don't care what Luigi says now. He said it was done properly at the time, but he did not. It sounds like. Again, I'm going by your word at the moment, and I can't put my reputation, if you will. Not that I have a super reputation, but good news. But like I said, Karen Agnifilo indicated in the state court versus New York that she has reason to believe that the arrest in Altoona, Pennsylvania may have violated his rights. I would imagine, just guessing here, that Karen Agnifilo and her team are working with Thomas Dickey and his team in Pennsylvania, and that the two sides have a vested interest to share information. I doubt Karen Agnifilo is in an isolation tank away from Thomas Dickey. So I would imagine that Thomas Dickey probably told Karen Agnifilo, I'm about to file paperwork, which, by the way, that paperwork, I don't believe Thomas Dickey filed the paperwork until after Karen Agnifilo gave her press conference. So Karen Agnifilo is hinting that there's more to come because she knows Thomas Dickey is about to file a motion to suppress. And she knows that there's good reason for that motion to suppress. And I would imagine that Karen's couched statement of, I'm not sure, I haven't seen the body cam footage myself, but we have reason to believe that Luigi Mangione's constitutional rights were violated. That's because she hasn't seen it, but she knows probably from Thomas Dickey that this is what allegedly happened, and if it happened that way and they can prove it, then they're screwed. The Altoona Police Department's screwed on that arrest. Where did you read giving police a fake ID is not illegal? I will show you once more if I can find it. Okay. Well, shit. You know what? I've been tossing papers left and right as I do my live. Can you help me find? Look at that. The folded in half sheet of paper. There's a folded in half sheet of paper. My wife's helping me dig frantically to get you that information you want.
Here's the folded one.
All right. There's also a piece of paper that was right by it. Hopefully it's that one. Basically, Thomas Dickey stated in item 34 or 35, I think it was. My papers are all over the place. It's a jumbled mess, but I want to get you that answer. He stated in his Omnibus Pretrial Hearing for relief. Holy shit! I just did it again. That's amazing. Anyways, he stated that Luigi Mangione did not illegally provide false identification, to which I perked up and said, how did he not do that? Everybody knows he provided false identification. That's how he was arrested. The reason being is Thomas Dickey cited the law 18 PA dot, so I believe it's 18 space PA dot C dot S space 4914 in parentheses A. That is the legal law that Thomas Dickey is citing to say that Luigi Mangione did not present false identification to police officers. Let me hit it one more time because I think it's important, because especially if some people are tuning in late and they didn't hear it. The reason being is, this is the summary of the law. A person commits an offense if they provide false information about their identity to law enforcement authorities after being informed by a uniformed officer or an officer who has identified themselves as law enforcement that they are subject of an official investigation of a legal violation. That's the kicker right there. You are only committing a crime if you present false identification to an officer once you have been informed that you are under investigation for a crime. Luigi Mangione had not been informed that he was under investigation for 15 minutes. It is documented in the complaint when exactly police officers told Luigi Mangione he was under investigation. And they had already asked for his identification, and that identification, before he was informed he was under investigation for some kind of crime, is not illegal in the state of Pennsylvania. It's a misdemeanor, even if if he was informed that it was during a commission of a crime or that he was being investigated for a crime. But it's a misdemeanor, not a felony. That's Pennsylvania law, correct? Pennsylvania law 18 space PA, I'm assuming for Pennsylvania, .C, .S, and then it's got a squiggly sign. I don't know how to pronounce that squiggly tilde. Sign. Huh?
Tilde?
No, it's not a tilde. You can look at it here in a second. 4914 parentheses A. You want to look at that top line and see that little squiggly S thing? I forgot what that's called.
Oh. It starts with a C.
Yeah. Some kind of squiggly S-looking thing is part of that whole equation. However, if you Google it without that little squiggly sign, you're still going to find it. Any other questions, comments, concerns about my analysis tonight? Sorry the dog is so annoying. Thank you for the comments about the nice job on the review. Sorry if I sound a little shouty. I have one individual who watches my reposts on YouTube, and they sometimes complain that I shout too much. I have a passion behind the things that I say, and so I get excited sometimes. I will do that. Where am I uploading this? I have a YouTube channel called Devil's Advocates. So you can find me by searching Devil's Advocates on YouTube. You can also go easier to it by going to devilsadvocates.info website. Front page of that website is always reposted my latest videos. This video will be posted a couple of hours after we close up tonight. It takes that long for me to get it downloaded from TikTok and re-uploaded to YouTube. Keep in mind that I have found that when people link to it from my website, that it seems to take them to the standard definition version, which is a little lower quality, but you can click on the button that says watch on YouTube and it goes to a high def version. Not that you need it in high def, but the point being is that it looks a little cleaner. Thank you for the encouragement for my review of this information tonight. Does each jurisdiction have to make a ruling on the admissibility of evidence? Yes, of the evidence. So yeah, each case has to be presented basically separately. And this is why I'm saying if Altoona, Pennsylvania made an illegal search and seizure and arrest and detention, the things that they found on him probably cannot be used. Should not be used in any other court system because it was all illegally obtained in the first place. Any other questions, comments, concerns? You're welcome for the summary. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this amazing live tonight with 21.4K likes. I don't know if I got gifts in there, but if I did, thank you so much for the gifts, and I apologize for not calling you out. I'm kind of not super familiar with what gifts look like exactly and what their dollar amounts or minuscule things are, but I appreciate any likes. All that is super good for the algorithm, the concurrent viewers. Thank you so much for everything. So with that, it looks like, and 89 viewers is pretty great. I think the top I've ever had was 90. I don't know if I ever reached 90 tonight. So concurrent users, thank you. That looks like a gift of some kind. Thank you so much. So as my final reminder of the night, a couple things I want to point out to you. One, I'll be going live again on Friday night at 6 p.m. I'm trying to do lives every Friday or every Wednesday and Friday night at 6 p.m. I always record the lives and I always republish them to YouTube and link those YouTube videos from my website, devilsadvocatesinfo.com. On my website, a underutilized tool I think that people just aren't really finding as useful as I think they could is my Luigi Mangione timeline, also my Brian Koberger timeline, but more my Luigi Mangione timeline. I have a lot of information on there on things that have caught my attention on this case going back years, going back quite a bit ago. Things that are threads in this case that I think might lead to questions about money motive, Department of Justice investigations, assassination possible attempt by the healthcare industry itself, other suspects who may have wanted Brian Thompson dead. Those kind of things are linked to my timeline. I don't always talk about them here. So if you ever are really wanting to get into something, check out my timeline. Come to me with a question from my timeline. Watch one of my videos. I've done long form videos on my timeline where I talk about various things in detail on those things. I'm doing a lot more content than people see. So if you are interested in seeing more of this content, please check me out and watch those videos. So again, devilsadvocates.info, YouTube channel, Devil's Advocates. Thank you everyone for coming tonight and making this an awesome show. It's been amazing. Have a good night.